Hello, everybody. Welcome to NTWC Plus, the 7th episode of Season 6. Good to have you along today. We've got a great program for you today. Jason Dunyon is here. We'll get to him in just a moment. I think it's going to be a fascinating program today, as always. Of course, our usual guests are here, Bill and Hal. But first, let's thank our sponsors. So there's Bill. Oh, wait a minute, Bill, where are you? Is that a fake backdrop behind you somewhere?
Yeah, no, it's not a virtual image. It's the real thing. I'm in Chimayo, New Mexico, roughly 6,500 feet higher up than you are. And it's a beautiful blue sky day here. And you see if the image was tilted a little, you could see the Jemez Mountains 40 miles across.
Wow, beautiful, beautiful image back there. So you have to take us for a tour one of these days when you're up there. That'd be great.
There we go.
That was good. Dr. Howe, you're somewhere in the jungle, it looks like. Where are you this morning?
I'm outdoors actually on Galveston Island. I've been out on the beach doing a lot of weather forecast and looking at the Gulf. I thought, might as well stay outside for the broadcast today. The dew point's only 26 degrees, so I'm enjoying that.
26 degrees.
Yeah, 26 Celsius. I switched over to that scale for the summer. So about 79 Fahrenheit.
Yeah, you're both at 26, but on different scales this morning. So that's
there you go. There you go.
Yeah, there we are. Perfect.
Well, good to have you guys along as always. Let's take a moment and thank those sponsors who make these shows a possibility. Then we'll get into it. USAA, thanks USAA. You do a great job for us. We appreciate it. South Padre Island Convention and Visitors Bureau, the host of the National Tropical Weather Conference. We'll see you all there again in April of 2026. Hard to believe. The Weather Company, Weather Boy, and LiveView, the organizations who make NTWC Plus a possibility in our 6th season of doing this throughout the hurricane season from June 1 all the way to the end of November. We're here each and every week to bring you a new program. So I think today's going to be fascinating. Jason Dunyon's with us. So I think, Hal, you've got the introduction today. So let's get to that and we'll get started with the program. Hal?
Yeah, let's hop to it. Our audience is going to love this episode today. Dr. Jason Dunyon is a leading hurricane researcher with NOAA's Hurricane Research Division and a key contributor to improving our understanding of tropical cyclones. Known for his groundbreaking work on Saharan air layers and hurricane structure, Dr. Dunyon combines cutting-edge field research with real-time forecasting support. His expertise plays a vital role in NOAA's mission to enhance hurricane prediction, protect lives, and advance science. Dr. Dunyon also serves as a key educator and mentor in the field. Jason, so glad to have you on the broadcast this morning. I know we've had you on before. Our audience has really loved hearing about what you're doing. Could you give us an update? What are the new things that you're working on there, you and your team, with the Hurricane Research Division?
Well, it's always great to be with you guys. There's always something new that we want to test out. This year in the field, we're going to be testing a wind LIDAR that we've got on one of our hurricane hunters. So it actually looks down and gives you a 3D look at what the winds look like. We've never tested this unit before, so it's going to be pretty exciting. And as usual, we'll be running into we'll talk about it today, of course, lots of Saharan dust outbreaks. We're always flying through those each year. So we take advantage of sampling them during a lot of our missions that we're flying.
Yeah, we got a lot of comments last time just how much in situ observations you're doing. You're going out, you're flying into storms, you're deploying these different technologies to measure. So the first thing you mentioned, you said it's a wind LIDAR. How does that work and what are the advantages? What can that help improve in hurricane forecasting?
It's a really interesting unit. So, we have our typical drop-ons, we call them, little parachuted weather instruments that we launch out of the planes. And those give you a single look all the way down to the surface of the ocean every 15 feet or so. If we've got this wind LIDAR, it's giving us continuous observations all the way across the flight path. And we might be doing, these figure 4 patterns, maybe even a butterfly pattern. And it's giving us a look all along the way. So it's almost like a drop sound on steroids, and it's able to get the winds below the aircraft during the entire flight.
So Jason, the wind LIDAR, does it stay attached to the airplane or does it come detached? Is it almost like a drop sound that moves horizontally as well? Yeah,
that's a great question. So this one is not going to be scanning yet. We're kind of testing it out this season since it's never been done. So we're taking advantage of a camera port that looks down. We've had it for years on the P3s. It's really just taken pictures in the past. And we said, well, why don't we try putting this wind LIDAR in this camera port so it's looking down as we're flying. But to your point, the idea in the future would be to have one that's scanning, so we're actually able to get a bigger picture of what the winds look like. So it's baby steps this year, but I think it's going to be pretty exciting.
That's pretty amazing. So, what kind of data could potentially you get from those wind LIDAR?
Yeah, so it's almost like the dropson gives us wind, 3D winds all the way to the surface. This can do the same thing, especially if we have a scanning capability. So you're able to basically feed this 3D wind information to the forecast models. Forecasters at the Hurricane Center can take a look at it. So it's really giving us a look at the winds in a way that we've really never been able to do before.
Jason, I know you and your team have worked a lot with Saharan Air Layer. Let's start off by why is that important for hurricane forecasting?
This one's interesting. There were folks studying this. My old boss was studying this back when I was in diapers. So we've known about these giant dust storms for years. What we started to unlock when we had our latest satellites, the GOES series, we call them. We're up to GOES 19 right now. We were able to start tracking these things, and we knew they were big coming off of Africa, but we didn't know how big. They're the size of the lower 48 states. I mean, it's pretty mind-boggling how large they are. And more importantly, they reach all the way across the Atlantic. So they'll reach places like South Florida, the Gulf states, even the southeast U.S. coast. And if we started zooming in a little bit, we started to notice, hey, not only is this really dry air, but it's interacting with a lot of the seedling hurricanes that are coming out of Africa. So we started to get new eyes on how these dust storms can actually they actually act to suppress the storms.
That's fascinating. So, Jason, we know that hurricanes like a moist atmosphere. I had a question for you that came in this spring. So sometimes we'll just get high pressure and dry air out there without the Saharan dust. What happens when you add the Saharan dust? I mean, is it even more prohibitive for hurricane development? Or if you already have a dry atmosphere, does it not really change things that much?
Yeah, that's a great question. I kind of look at the Saharan air layer or Saharan dust outbreaks as it's a trifecta. So the first piece is dry air. And if you're down on the surface, you don't actually feel it. It's about a mile above your head, but it's about half the moisture that we see in the tropics, even very deep in the tropics. And it's a great way to starve a thunderstorm or a cloud when it starts to suck in that dry air. You get these downdrafts and it just kills the storm. So that's trifecta number one. The second piece that's part of this package of these dust storms is very strong winds. And it's up at about 10 or 15,000 feet. And we've measured it with the balloons, with the hurricane hunters. It can be anywhere from 25, I've seen 50, 55 mile per hour winds. And that acts to rip your clouds apart, rip your hurricane apart. So that's trifecta number two. The third piece is the air is very warm up there. And it's almost like a lid. You can imagine this cloud reaches that warm air and it kind of stifles it. So you bring all these together and it creates this really unique air mass that if you want to grow up to be a hurricane, you don't want to be running into these things.
Jason, could you tell us a little bit about the seasonality? I mean, when are we most likely to see Saharan air dust layers? Is it all throughout hurricane season or just really a portion of the season?
Yeah, good question. So it's like Mother Nature's clockwork. Every single year we see these ramp ups in not only the size of the dust outbreak, but how far they reach to the west to places like the United States. That ramp up really starts in mid-June and goes all the way until early August. So we're still in that peak of the Saharan dust outbreak season. Once we get to mid-August, there's this switch point and they start to become smaller. They don't reach as far to the west. The Atlantic generally becomes more conducive to storms. And of course, that's when our hurricane season starts to pick up. So there's almost this, you can imagine it's like this switch point that happens in the middle of August each year.
Jason, I spent a few years in North Africa. I lived on the edge of the Sahara Desert. I went back a year and a half ago and I was amazed. I actually interviewed a local who said my grandma is 99 years old, and she said our current drought it blows away anything we've ever had before. I mean, it was unbelievable how dry it was there. With the tremendous drought in places like Morocco, Mauritania, are we seeing that produce more of these dust clouds coming out over the Atlantic?
That's a great question. I don't know if we have the answer to it. By the way, you've taken a trip to a place that I'd love to go, right? You study something for so long. I've never been there in person. One thing we know is that it's the thunderstorms that march across the Sahel that help kick off. The gust fronts come zooming out. If you've been in the Midwest and you've seen these gust fronts coming out of thunderstorms, they zoom out over the Sahara and lift up all this dust. So it does make sense if you have a drier Sahara, there's more dry dust, these old lake beds that could get kicked up. So the answer to your question is we don't really know, but it would be intriguing to keep an eye on it because if there is extra drought up there, it could be an extra source for dust, which eventually gets lifted up and taken out over the Atlantic.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Jason, before I pass the mic over to Bill, like what are some of the emerging research that we're seeing with Saharan Air Layer detection, prediction? I mean, where are we going with the research on that?
Yeah, I think one thing that we'd like to advance, and you've been over Africa, we're spoiled in different parts of the world, like the United States, the Caribbean. We have a lot of observations. We have balloon soundings, surface stations, and you know all too well how just desolate it is over Africa. We don't have a lot of observations, so it would be nice to get more, to feed that into the models, because that could give us a one-up on how big is this dust outbreak going to be, because that's where they're being born, over Africa. So if we have better observations over there, I think we can get a better handle on it. And to me, that now that we can track these dust storms and we can track how they might be interacting with, say, a tropical wave, which is a seedling for a hurricane that comes out of Africa, with new instruments like the wind LIDAR we talked about. We're going to be flying some drones this year. One of them is called the Black Swift. We can take it into some of these areas where we might see that dry, dusty air wrapping in, to give us a better handle on how protected is that seedling from all that dry, dusty air. Is it kind of sucking it and training it in, or does it have kind of a wall to keep it out? And I think that could help advance some of the forecasting.
Jason, when you said improved data coming out of Africa, do you mean even things as simple as an anemometer on the roof of a school that's just giving us wind obs from the Sahel or something like that?
I think, yes. I think any observation is a good observation, and as long as you're taking use of it, right? Sometimes an observation is only going into the hands of the forecaster, and they can put it to work and improve their forecasts. But if we can get some of this information into a model, that makes the model smarter. And places over Africa, really, we rely on satellites to give us a lot of the information. But what about all the things that the satellite can't detect? And I think, to answer your question, it would be really important to get some extra observations out there.
Man, fantastic perspectives. Let's pass the mic up 6,500 feet out to you, Bill. I'm sure you have a whole bunch of questions for Jason.
All right, take my oxygen mask off. Now I can talk again. Continuing on the dust. I know the peak of the dust season tends to be a June, July, maybe early August timeframe. Does the northward advancement of the intertropical convergence zone, African monsoon, whatever you want to call it, is that what shuts it down and allows for a more active, the more healthy waves, so to speak, coming off of Africa?
That's a great question. One of the important pieces is that intertropical convergence zone, the ITCZ. So that marches northward as we get into June, July, and it brings a lot of moisture over the Sahel. The Sahel gets the moisture and the greening that we see over the Sahel. I don't know if Hal's made that trip that far south, but that temperature contrast between kind of the cooler, moister Sahel and the Sahara to the north, that's critical for making these ripples in the atmosphere we call tropical waves, the seedlings really for the hurricanes. But it's also really important for kicking off the Saharan dust storm. So there's this careful balance, right? I think you're right. Once we start to moisten up parts of that Sahara, there's less dust to lift up. But that big temperature contrast that we see over Africa is key. It's just so important for getting these things kicked off.
Yeah, I actually had the privilege when I was in the Navy in the early 70s. There was a severe drought in the Sahel, and it was people were dying by the thousands because of starvation and no water. And interestingly enough, both those seasons were really low tropical activity, 72, 73.
Yeah, and to your point, what if the Sahara Desert expanded over the Sahel and you got rid of that temperature contrast? It was just all hot Sahara Desert. It's a possibility that you could shut down the nursery for hurricanes in the Atlantic. So I think there's a lot we don't understand. And what you're saying, the precipitation we see over Africa, really important to understand. And what Hal was mentioning, extra observations to really get a handle on what is the precipitation and the weather patterns we see over there, I think could go a long way for us.
Yeah, it's just vast spaces where no one's at. It would seem like it'd be ripe for a remote mesonet type system that have become common in this part of the world. Someday we'll get it.
Yeah, exactly.
Are you flying any missions yourself this year, or are you working from mostly Connecticut?
Yeah, so this year I'm going to be the science director for our hurricane field program. So my job is to try to bring all the PIs together who have interest to do research and make sure we get the biggest bang for the buck. So I'll be doing that, but I'll also be getting out onto the hurricane hunters. So it's an easy trip for me to get down. We keep the planes down in Lakeland, Florida, to jump on a plane, and whether we do it from Lakeland or go down to the Caribbean, I should have several flights this year, I would guess. I have a lot of spots on the schedule this year.
Great. One of the things that always fascinates me, and not being an engineer type, is when you get these ideas to try to come up with a new sensor. What's the process when you first get an inkling that this is something we want to measure? How do you come up with a LIDAR, for example, that is going to work from an airplane? To me, it seems incredibly complicated.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I've always found there's always somebody smarter than me. That's a good thing to appreciate. And I might have an idea to go study, say, a Saharan dust outbreak that's coming across the Atlantic. But I may know a scientist, say, at NASA, who's developing an instrument, and that's a whole different kind of expertise. But it might fit really well with trying to look at, say, the dry air or how much dust there is in the layer. So it's really, I think collaboration is the best way to make yourself smarter, because you start bringing a team together. Maybe I've got the idea for something, but somebody has the capability to measure it, or maybe the aircraft that can get us out there. So collaboration, I think, is a real key in the world that we're working in.
Yeah. Do you eventually, when you get to the point where you know what you want to make, do you end up working with like a private company that builds things, contract with them to develop one for you?
Yeah, that's one way to do it. So some of the work we do is with NASA. That wind LIDAR we talked about is with a university. But there's also these business opportunities. So that drone we talked about, that Black Swift, that's about this big, and we launch it out of the P3. That's a private company. So we've worked with them, and it goes back to the collaboration. They don't have the hurricane meteorological expertise that we have, but we don't have the technology expertise that they have. But we bring it together, and suddenly we can start doing great things. And we've started doing that with these little Black Swift aircraft.
Yeah, Joe was with us last week, and we got an earful of some really great and promising stuff in the future. When I retired, you had the Coyote. I think that was it, and it was, seemed like a long way to now. And it's about right. He said the guys were saying maybe 10 years from now we'll have something much better, and sure enough, you do.
Yeah, exactly. And I was on that first flight with the Coyote. It was like groundbreaking, but we've come so far already. And I think the best way to do it is we're launching drones out of the P3s, out of the hurricane hunters, but we're also maybe using larger ones. Like we used the plane called the Global Hawk, flying up at 60,000 feet about 10 years ago. That can also add something to the game where we're kind of overflying the storm. So I would love to see 10 or 20 years from now, what does this game look like that we're playing with the hurricane hunters? I think it's going to be pretty exciting.
Yeah, I'd love to see it too, but it's primarily because I had made it to 95. Politics aside, how do you see evolving into the C-130 as a replacement aircraft, which is a very different tube than the P3? Do you have some ideas of how the workstation setup might be in a weather-equipped 130?
Yeah, that's going to be interesting. So the P3 is that Navy sub hunter. That's been around since the mid-'70s. We've got two of those. So they're actually a little bit younger than me even. And they've been great. They've been workhorses for NOAA. But they don't make that aircraft anymore. So we had to come up with a plan B, as you know. So the C-130s, that's the Air Force already flies those. So they've already kind of vetted that out. I think big things that are going to be different are we have a lot of windows on the P3, and that's very useful when you're trying to get your situational awareness. You're looking at what's going on. The C-130s don't really have a lot of window opportunities, as you know, Bill. I think you've been on one of those planes. But they are workhorses. They can fly a little bit higher than the P3s, maybe a little bit slower, but they have a great range. They can be out there for 10 or 11 hours. So I think if we equip them correctly and put little pods on the wings, maybe have some kind of a radar that we replace. We have a tail Doppler radar now, but maybe we've got a next generation coming. those platforms, the C-130, I think is going to be great. I just think it's going to be a learning curve because we're going to need to turn it into a flying weather station, right? And there's a bit of work to do to get it to that point for NOAA.
Yeah. What I was thinking about that, it would probably be when you actually know it's coming and have some timelines on that, you might start getting some of your scientists to ride as a spectator with the 53rd for aircraft familiarity, because it is a different, same engines are upside down, but it flies totally different the way it's produced. And I think getting that familiarity, it won't be so foreign as when you're making the change.
Right, and it's a great point. And we draw a lot of our pilots from, say, Jax down in the Navy base down in Florida. So there's going to be a different pipeline, right? It's a totally different aircraft. We've got to train our pilots to fly a completely different aircraft. Yeah. The good thing is the Air Force is already doing it. So it's always good not to be the guinea pig with these things. I think there's a lot we can learn from the Air Force while we try to spin up. Yeah,
well, it goes back to your collaboration. You probably get far more results than if you try to run solo on it.
Yep, that's a great point.
Yeah. And I think the Navy pipeline, sadly to say, from my point of view, is probably over with, because I don't see us flying the P-8s as they get older, punch them through hurricanes. That's not the airframe you want to do it with.
No, exactly right. The P-8 was the replacement for the P-3, but it went to jet engines, so it's not ideal. Just like we don't take our Gulfstream 4 jet that NOAA has into the storm. Jet engines just don't do a great job in that kind of environment.
No, yeah. I think if you scratch the paint on the Navy planes, you might still see the Southwest logo. Tim, what do you got coming in on your end?
Yeah, do you? I think this is interesting. All the technology advances and stuff, and we talked a little bit with Joe last week about with the drones and everything. Do you see a time, and how far in the future is this time, when we kind of laugh that we actually flew people into hurricanes because we'll be flying drones and everything else, and we just say, can you believe back in 2025 we were flying people into hurricanes? Do you see that time coming?
I do. I see it down in the future. I think my career will still involve having those P3 Hurricane Hunter flights, but I think there will come a time where the technology will advance enough. We look back at the Hurricane Hunters. I knew one of the original Hurricane Hunters. His name was Charlie Newman. They were literally hunting. They didn't know if a storm was out there. They were flying areas trying to actually hunt for them. We don't do that anymore. We know exactly where we're going. But if you think about the technology, we've had crewed aircraft for decades and decades, and I think we're getting to that point where it's going to start to change. I think we're going to need to have the crewed aircraft for quite some time, and we can test all this drone technology from the crewed aircraft. But there will become a day where I'll be in a rocking chair looking back at, I used to do something that folks don't do anymore.
I almost see it where you might have one crewed plane out there, but you got a dozen drones, flying the storms. You get so much data coming in. I mean, that future's got to be exciting.
Exactly. And you think about when we come in and out of the storm, there are these big gaps. We can only stay out there for so long. The crew needs their rest. So we get out in the storm. Maybe we're in it for 3 hours, 3.5 hours, and we have to go home. Next plane comes in. But there are all these gaps, and a lot of things can happen in between the gaps. A storm can rapidly intensify. So really, to your point, what if you could drop all these drones from your aircraft and they're still there, like sentinels in the storm, while you're going home and you're waiting for the next aircraft to come back? I mean, to me, that would be a huge advancement for us.
What are you talking about? Talking about Africa and having a good network, a mesonet of some kind. It would be your mesonet within a hurricane.
It would. I mean, we have the same gap over Africa. You can think of it the same way we have it with the Hurricane Hunters, because we can't be there all the time.
Yep.
Let's talk about the dust for a second, because you said at the beginning how long we've really been able to see the dust. Say that again, because that's been 20 minutes ago.
Yeah, so there were some field campaigns back in the 60s that looked at these, and they were right off the coast of Africa near the Cabo Verde Islands. So we're going back decades at that point. But the first GOES satellites started coming online, say, in the mid-90s, and they had multiple infrared channels that allowed us, when we started tweaking it just right, when I made the first image, I was like, wow, this is pretty crazy. This outbreak is huge, and it's going across the entire Atlantic, and we can track it 24/7. I think, Tim, it goes back to what you're saying about having observations, Africa, the hurricane hunters. Those GHOST satellites suddenly gave us eyes all the way from Africa to the United States. And you get an image nowadays, it's every 5 minutes or so. So there's no gaps. So, from the mid-90s, we really started to advance our understanding of what's going on with these dust outbreaks.
So we've got about a 30-year sample size. What kind of trends do you see then with the dust? I mean, do you see, talking about the drought impacting it, have you seen the other trends in that relatively short sample size?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's an important one to answer too, right? Any changes over Africa are going to have an impact there. I was talking with my colleague, Mike Lowry. I think you guys know him well. And we're both dust geeks, and we love looking at this stuff. And one thing that we've noticed is if you look at the satellite record, some of the satellites go back to, say, the 80s, and they're pretty good. There was a lot of dust back in the 80s and not a lot of hurricane activity. And then everything switched. It became less dusty. Hurricane activity increased as we got into the 90s and 2000. So there's definitely this very predictable ramp up, like we said, as you get into the summer to midsummer of the dust outbreaks. But every year has its own flavor. And we've been able to see some really interesting trends, like 2020, they call it the monster dust outbreak, biggest one we've ever seen. And even the health levels in places like the Caribbean, actually, by EPA standards, it was so dusty that it was unhealthy air to breathe. Compare that to 2025, it's the second least dusty start we've had on the satellite era record. So for some reason this year, we're still getting outbreaks, but it's had a very slow start. And we don't know why, because we don't really understand what's happening over Africa as much as we need to, right? It all starts there, and that's where we really need to have some breakthroughs. And we got to use HAL's connections and try to get a better understanding of what is happening over Africa that's going to affect us later on.
What if there'll come a point when Dr. Phil includes the Saharan dust specifically as one of his criteria in his seasonal forecast, because we'll have such good understanding of it that they can really see the tides.
Exactly. And we're trying to, and I've talked to Phil quite a bit, we're trying to get a better understanding of what's the dust activity early in the season, say late spring, early June. Can we look at that dust activity and get a sense of what's it going to look like when the hurricane season really ramps up? Can we make that connection that could help us make a better forecast for the activity that we'll see?
Fascinating stuff. Let's take a break from the subject for a minute. Bill, tropics are, not dead. The Pacific seems to be, but the Atlantic is at least showing signs of life. What do you see for your tropical update today? We'll get back to more about the Saharan dust in a second, Bill.
Okay, let's roll then. I haven't looked at the dust. I'm so embarrassed. Okay.
It's hard to see your keyboard out there in the bright light of the New Mexico mountains.
Yeah, well, we need the light here to see. Otherwise, you'll just see a black face in the background. Okay, on the big picture, as you can see, there's the feverish Eastern Pacific has calmed down. We haven't had anything of note out there for almost 2 weeks. Caribbean is almost convection-free, as is most of the main development region. The ITZ monsoon trough is kind of active, but not abnormally so, probably less than average, actually. Convection up here is a frontal wave that caused part of the system that caused the flooding in the mid-Atlantic yesterday. Sometimes you watch one of these break off and over the warmer waters this time of year, and you get your subtropical, tropical, but nothing's hinting at that. That leaves us with this cluster of thunderstorms on the northern Gulf. Yesterday, it was over Florida. The day before, it was over there. So the simple idea is that it's trekking westward. The big high-pressure dome right here gives a big channel of easterly current, and it's off to the races going west. Unfortunately, for those that want a hurricane, it likes to travel right over land. Hurricane Center yesterday had the odds up to 40% and haven't really changed anything on that. Proximity to land is their number one negative factor, and it looks like it still has a bit of shear going against it on the satellite. Little closer view of the convection that's with it. Starting to see some new developments since I first pulled this group of slideshow together, just off of Mexico Beach, actually, as it's moving westward. But all through its history, the predominant convection has been well west and southwest of where the disorganized center of the low might be. It'll take a few seconds for this to spin up, but this is the sector with a high resolution on that. You can still barely make out the swirl that NHC was anchoring on for their updated outlook in there. There was another swirl, a bigger swirl maybe down in here. So kind of question is, well, maybe this one will take over, and that's where the convection is, and that would be not surprised at all to see a new low form down in here in the not too distant future. This always happens. I have my observations. There they are. These have all swung around to south. They were northeast when I first got up this morning. The old swirl, though, I was unable to pencil out any kind of a surface low centered over Florida. It's just maybe a sharp trophy axis there. And there's another big trough that the convection is hammering away at out here in the Gulf, down through here. So the big area where no data is where we're going to be watching out for it. On radar, these cells are now moving north. Those are moving south. So this general area in here is the area where there's, I think, a hint of where the low may be trying to form, but it's heading west. It doesn't have a whole lot of time over open water. We shall see on the development. As far as the predominant condition favoring this thing getting going is the way above normal North Gulf sea surface temperatures. Those purples are 32 degrees centigrade, to use Hal's terminology, which is very warm. Anywhere in the Gulf is sufficiently warm from now on in to support tropical development. Quick look at the forecasts. For not very well developed low, the guidance has been very consistent, probably because the steering flow is very well defined. And again, it keeps it hugging the coastline. And again, you might shift all this a little bit south if a new low is forming south of where all these points are down here. And the models will do the same if they anchor on a low further south. And it might trick it further west and maybe even water my yard. Back one. None of them do anything with the intensity. I'm not quite sure why they perk up after the system's over land, but I didn't really delve into that. I was more interested in what was happening here at the development phase. Next up, always get that in the way. There we go. What the main impact of this has been advertised all week is heavy rain. If it does develop at all and stays organized, the entire Gulf Coast from western Panhandle all the way over in East Texas should see an easy 1 to 3 inches, with the forecast showing the potential in there for 4 to 8 inches in southeast Louisiana and nearby Mississippi, perhaps. And for those that always want to look farther ahead, it's kind of a nothing dead, nothing dying still in the weeks 3 and 4. On that, they show a perk up maybe in the Eastern Pacific as we get into August. Okay. Any questions, Tim or Hal or Jason?
I always think of those systems, Bill, as like the bubbling cauldron. Sometimes they just don't have enough time. They need time. We see those with the waves coming off of Africa. Yeah. This one just seems like if it was a little bit more offshore, it might have some time to really spin up.
Us older folks that live in the Houston area immediately zoom back to Alicia when we see something like this. It wasn't that much farther offshore, and it was initially a much more innocuous disturbance than this one has been.
Thanks for the update, Bill. It's always good. It's always a good reminder too that we don't need a named storm to get life-threatening flooding rains, right?